Good evening. I'm Francesca D'Alessio, the Associate Educator here at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I am beyond delighted to welcome you here tonight. Thank you all so much for coming. It is so wonderful to see you here. Tonight, we celebrate the lives of gods, divinity in Maya art. Open now through April 2nd, so please make time to see the exhibition if you have not already. The exhibition is made possible by the William Randolph Hearst Foundation, the Placido Arengo Fund, the Diane W. and James E. Burke Fund, the Gail and Parker Gilbert Fund, the Mellon Foundation, and the International Council of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It is organized by the Met and the Kimball Art Museum. According to Maya mythology, humans are made of maize, and the plant is featured prominently in Maya art, literature, music, and poetry. Tonight, we're going to take a deeper look at the cultivation methods of the Maya used to grow this crop and the importance of maize and the Mesoamerican diet. Its enduring ritual, aesthetic, and cultural values. We welcome 4 experts tonight to share their work on the subject, each approaching from various directions, but in different discovery, sustainability, and conservation. We welcome our first speaker, Lara Filloy Nadal. She is the co-curator of the exhibition, The Lives of Gods, Divinity in Maya Art. She is also the associate curator for the Arts of Ancient Americas, the Michael C. Rockefeller Wing here at the Met. Lara is a specialist in pre-Hispanic and early colonial Latin American art, archaeology, and cultures. A seasoned museum curator, Lara will be our first speaker framing this exhibition, and then following the presentations, Lara will facilitate a panel discussion with tonight's participants right here center stage. Our second speaker we welcome tonight is Oswaldo Chinchilla Mazariegos, Associate Professor of Anthropology, Director of Undergraduate Studies of Archaeology at Yale University. Oswaldo is an archaeologist specializing in complex societies of ancient Mesoamerica. He continues to conduct renowned and extensive field research. His multiple books offer innovative views and methodological breakthroughs in the study of ancient Maya religion and art. Next, we welcome Marcello A. Canuto, the Director of Middle America Research Institute, Professor of Anthropology at Tulane University. He has undertaken archaeological excavations in the Maya region and various other locations. Broadly, his interests include household and community dynamics, the development of socio-political complexities in ancient societies, the definition of identity through material culture, and the modern social context of archaeology in Mesoamerica. Marcello uses innovative LiDAR technology to indicate how these populations were supported. The final speaker we welcome to this podium will be Diana Wangeman. She's the chef, historian, and founding owner of Sobre Masa Tortilleria and Restaurant. Sobre Masa is a family-owned restaurant in Brooklyn. Diana, along with her husband Zach, work in conservation, sustainability, focusing on social and economic impact of agriculture has on our society. Following Diana's presentation, we will have a dialogue center stage facilitated by Lara Filloy Nadal. At the end of the program, as you're exiting, our team member will hand you a sample from Sobre Masa Restaurant. Please only take 1 per household and don't open the bags in the museum. Please join in a warm welcome for Lara Filloy Nadal.
Good evening. Thank you, Francesca, for this kind presentation. And thank you all for being here for this festive occasion linked to the exhibition, Life of the Gods, Divinity in Maya Art. I had the pleasure to co-curate this exhibition with my friends and colleagues, Joanne Pillsbury, present here in the front row in this great auditorium, and Oswaldo Chinchilla. Life of the Gods will be on view at the Met until April the 2nd, and it will travel next to Fort Worth, Texas, to be shown at the Kimball Art Museum. Throughout history and worldwide, artists have long attempted to give visual form to divine power. Life of the Gods is the first major exhibition of Maya art in the United States in the past 10 years. It brings together around 100 rarely seen masterpieces of the classical period, AD 250-900, crafted in the countries we know nowadays as Guatemala, Honduras, and southern Mexico, mostly created in spectacular royal cities nested in the tropical forest. The culture we know as the classic Maya thrives for some 700 years. The Maya were never unified into a single empire. This region was made up of many rival city-states. They are the ancestors of millions of Maya people whom today live in Mexico, Central America, and the diaspora communities in the United States. The ancient Maya revered an array of gods and goddesses who oversaw critical aspects of the cosmos and the world. They ruled over the cycles of day and night, and also possessed ownership of the earth resources, including the rain, the thunders, and the agricultural richness. With this exhibition, we wanted to honor the extraordinary talent of the Maya artists that gave form to the gods in remarkable, inspired ways throughout works full of visual complexity and refinement that have enlarged our understanding of the classic Maya art and culture. Exquisitely carved sculptures embody divine power, and finally painted ceramics reveal the eventful life of the gods in rich detail, some of which were even signed by Maya artists. In Maya art, one of the greatest artistic traditions in the ancient Americas, the gods are depicted in all stages of life, as infants, as adults at the peak of their maturity and influence, and finally, as they age. The gods could perish, and some of them were born anew, providing a model of regeneration and resilience. The true understanding of the profound religious meanings of these objects has advanced significantly in recent years, thanks to the decipherment of Maya writing, the use of oral history, and the mythological narratives recorded by Spanish friars in the 16th century, and the collaborative research among colleagues and the contemporary Maya communities. Most of the vessels were eventually deposited in burials as offerings, sometimes full of drinks and food. But we must remember that before that, they were used in everyday life, maybe given as gifts of exchange as luxury items. The carefully painted glyph across the top of this decorated ceramic tells us that this vessel was created for the king of Naranjo, a Maya city-state, and that was intended to contain cacao, the substance from which chocolate is made. Cacao pods, the source of chocolate, were among the most valuable goods in the ancient Maya economy and were used to prepare drinks consumed during religious rituals and festive occasions. The recently excavated works in the exhibition include some delightfully inventive serving vases from El Sots, Guatemala. In at least one case, we know what it was for dinner, as quail bones were found in its interior. But these works are also reminders of the essential missing elements of ancient rituals: music, dance, prayer, smoke, incense, food, and drink, which were vital channels for communicating with divine power. All these things, food, drinks, incense, music, were offered to the gods in a reciprocal relationship to appease them and encourage them to grant their favors. The Maya themselves will say they had 8,000 gods, a Maya metaphor to say that they had a multitude of divinities. Some were very local, while others were linked to universals, such as the two essential and interrelated gods, Chak, the powerful rain god, and Kawil, the god of lightning, fertility, and abundance. Rain gods were venerated through the Maya region, as acts of appeasement to them were, and still are, critical for the well-being of communities. Chak, the rain god, was one of the more powerful, pervasive, and enduring of the Maya gods. He was venerated across the region and continues to be honored in contemporary traditional Maya communities. Water is sometimes scarce, and ancient city inhabitants survive by storing rainwater in reservoirs, but they also suffer from excessive rain. Chak was commonly portrayed with a human body and fantastic features, like his spiral eyes, fish-like whiskers, and gills. A highlight in the exhibition is this tripod plate that depicts Chak waist-high in water, with the maize god emerging from a watery and celestial beings hovering above him. Chak is capricious, unpredictable god. We often see him with arms raised, ready to strike. He often wields an axe in the shape of Kawil, the lightning god. Kawil was often depicted with a smoking axe through their forehead and a serpentine leg. Lightning strikes were thought to fertilize the earth, and from this tropical storm would rise the staple crop of the Maya, the maize or corn. As Kawil has the power of the reproductive forces of living creatures, including the plants. These extraordinary objects are called eccentric flints. They are ritual implements and hafted to a wood shaft. They might have served as scepter before they were deposited in offerings. In Maya beliefs, flints were formed by the lightning strikes. They were carefully shaped into a primary figure. I think you can make out the profiles, with secondary figures branching out from the first. This flint could be quite elaborate, such as this centipede-like canoe diving into the underworld. The lightning god himself is one of the passengers. These remarkable objects would not have required extended hours to produce, but they would have required exceptional skills. In this small panel, an elegantly attired woman holds up a small creature who turns toward her, gesturing as in conversation. The small figure is again Kawil, the lightning god, a god that is also patron deity of royal power, recognizable by his serpentine foot and the smoky celt emerging from his forehead. Kawil is often held as a scepter in royal portraits, and his presence is evoked as rulers celebrate important rituals events. In Maya beliefs, kings and queens not only serve as political and military leaders, but were also responsible for the care of the gods. They serve as intermediaries between the divine and the community. Equally essential and inextricably connected to the rain god, the maize god was a favored subject of Maya artists, as he was one of the universal gods. He is found everywhere. Let's now welcome Oswaldo Chinchilla to the podium, who will tell us more about the epic life of the maize god. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. Well, I had the pleasure of co-curating this exhibition together with Laura and Joanne, and it's a great pleasure to be here and tell you a little bit about one of the most important deities in the Maya religion. And I will start with a page from the Popol Vuh, the starting page from the Popol Vuh, this very important document that we have that was originally written in the mid-16th century by Quiché Maya authors from western Guatemala, and that contains a wealth of information about ancient Maya religion and mythology. The Popol Vuh is not the only source that we have. We also are fortunate to have a lot of information from ethnographic sources, because people in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize still preserve many of the religious beliefs that they that existed since ancient times about maize and what it meant for Maya people. In the Popol Vuh, the gods at the outset get together and ask these questions. How shall it be sown? When shall there be a dawn for anyone? Who shall be a provider? And who shall be a sustainer? Dennis Tedlock, who translated the Popol Vuh, realized that these questions were crucial to the narrative. And these were the things that they wanted to create, but they didn't know how to do it. And that's why they were asking these questions. How shall it be sown refers to maize, to planting maize. How shall maize be planted? When shall there be a dawn for anyone? Refer to the origin of the sun and the moon. The sun, how shall it dawn? How should the sun come out? And then the next two questions refer to the origin of people. Who should they be? And then they start making trials and errors. They first try to create people from mud, then from wood, and all of these are failures because that was not the right substance to create people. So the rest of the Popol Vuh is a long story about how they finally found the right substance, and that was maize. So the Popol Vuh is not particularly explicit about this. It doesn't tell us this is the maize god, but it tells the story of these heroes who eventually, that at the same time explains the origin of maize. Now, how does this correlate with Maya art? In vases such as this, which we have in the exhibition, the maize god is portrayed as a baby or a very young man. He is very frequently portrayed in water. He's what we see at the bottom of the vase is a water band with tadpoles swimming. So he's in water. And notice by the position that he has in that portrait is that of a baby. He's resting on his back with the legs raised, and that is how they portrayed babies. And above all, he was handsome. He was beautiful. This elongated head that he had with a tuft of hair growing on top is just like a corn cob. And that was the most beautiful thing that they could think of. And we have it in beautiful portraits such as this one from Copan, also in the exhibition. We had the pleasure of learning some things while doing the exhibition, and one of them was about these musical instruments, which is hard to realize that they are that just by seeing them, but we were able to do X-rays that are shown here, and show that they can be blown, that they have interior conduits that would produce sound. And then we can imagine people blowing them. They're tiny whistles, so that would be a very sharp noise that they would produce. And these are portraits of the maize god, again. The maize god was also not only a god of maize, but a god of all wealth, all kinds of wealth and abundance. And here in this bowl, we see him portrayed as a cacao tree with cacao pods growing from his body. cacao pods are the fruits that from which we get chocolate. And for the Maya and other people in Mesoamerica, this was wealth. They even used the cacao grains to buy and sell things, just like currency. Now, the question that they asked in the Popol Vuh, how shall it be sown? The answer was a quest, was a journey that the heroes undertake, and that takes them to confront other gods and powerful beings and to overcome them, to try to triumph over them. In ancient Maya art, we see this portrayed as a journey. Let me go to the next slide, because here we see the maize god on that side, surrounded by naked women, by beautiful women. What does this mean? Here we see the same thing. In the maize god in a pool of water, and two young women pulling his arms. What's interesting is that while this may seem like a very jolly scene, it marks the death of the maize god. This is how he died. And that is apparent from the hieroglyphs that are written on this other vase that basically refer to the death of the maize god. And that is the start of the journey. We need to reconstruct this journey by piecing together information that is scattered. So trying to make sense of different representations on different objects in ancient Maya art. And this is from another vase that shows us the maize god riding a canoe, going across water. This is his journey to death. He is taking a stance that's very characteristic of sadness. The hand here on the forehead. The same in these beautiful incised bones from the site of Tikal in Guatemala, where he's accompanied by animals who are also taking this sad stance. And actually, I believe that their open mouths mean that they're howling and crying as they go across water in the canoe. So this is the journey, the death journey of the maize god. But eventually, this journey will lead to rebirth, to triumph over different kinds of powerful beings. Remember that the maize god is very young. He's a boy, a young man. But he's able to overcome the very powerful beings that he confronts, other gods. And finally, he reemerges, as shown in these two beautiful plates. In one case, he's reemerging from a water lily, together with water lily flowers around him. In the other, he's emerging from a cleft turtle, which we think that represents the earth, like a maize plant growing from the earth. And there are other gods that are watering him and helping him to come out. These same gods also have their own stories. And we also have other objects in the exhibition that refer to the deeds of other young gods who were also participants in the journey of the maize god. And here they are shooting down a big bird, another one of these evil beings that basically wanted to prevent them from triumphing and from creating the conditions for human life on earth. The plight of these deities also explains the rise of the sun. So the answer to the other question that they posed in the Popol Vuh, how shall it dawn? The result of all of this was maize. And in the Popol Vuh, right after They tell us the story of the maize god and of the heroes and how they overcame the death gods and other deities. The next thing that happens is that they find maize. They found a bountiful place in a mountain that was full of not only maize, but all kinds of abundance. And that was the right matter to create people. This is what they tell us. Thus was found the food that would become the flesh of the newly framed and shaped people. Water was their blood. It became the blood of humanity. The ears of maize entered into their flesh. A goddess ground this maize, mixed it with water, and then from this was made the flesh of humanity. This is how significant maize is for the Maya. It is the matter that forms people. By consuming maize, basically they enter into a communion with maize. Maize is a baby. Remember, maize is a baby, a very young man who needs to be cared, who needs to be tendered. That's how it works. And people are responsible for keeping it, for making it grow, for creating the conditions, not only by working in the fields, but also by keeping him happy, conducting the rituals, the appropriate rituals, religious rituals that will allow maize to prosper and humanity to benefit from him. And with this, I have the pleasure of introducing my dear colleague, Marcello Canuto.
Good evening, everyone. And I want to thank the Metropolitan Museum for inviting me to present this evening. I had a chance to see the exhibit today, and it was spectacular. So I really commend those who were involved. This is the job incredibly well done. So tonight, my charge is to perhaps see things at a sort of slightly higher perspective, a couple of 100 meters. You'll see why I say a couple 100 meters in a moment, and talk to you a little bit about the importance of maize as seen from the perspective of field archaeology. And why we want to talk about maize, why do we want to talk about foods? And I'm now going to bring up other civilizations. It is the engine that runs a civilization. It feeds people. In Archaeology 101, every civilization in the world, even our own, is based upon the concept of surplus production, the idea that a subset of people make enough food for others not to have to do so. And those folks can dedicate their lives to other pursuits. And whether this is in the Indus Valley or in Egypt or in the Sumer civilization of Mesopotamia, grains such as wheat and barley were the engines of that surplus. In Southeast Asia and in other parts of the world, rice provided that function. For the Maya, of course, it was maize. And it was what fed a civilization for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, it's important just to give a bit of a context of where we work. And perhaps because as an archaeologist, I just want to share my pain with you all. I'm going to give you a moment to see where we are. This is the general area of the Maya, the Yucatan Peninsula. But much of what we have looked at tonight and what is seen in the exhibition, comes from that highlighted area. And it dates to that time period of about 2,000 years, from 900 BCE to about 900 CE. And it is during that time that we know the Maya civilization developed several peaks of monumentality, great periods of great development, both in terms of political centralization, of art, and of populations. Both at these are two sort of signature sites, El Mirador in northern Guatemala and in Tikal, at different time periods. And during this nearly 2 millennia, the Maya developed a very complex system, not just of art, of monumentality, of artistry, of architecture, astronomy, writing, but also economic systems, exchange, travel, communication, and so forth, and created a very complex network of interactions. It all came to a somewhat crashing end around 900 or 1000 AD. Now, that might seem like a terrible, terrible, sad story, but for us as archaeologists, it means that no one was around in the area that we're looking at after 1000 AD to muck things up for us. So we have at least 1,000 years where humans were out of the region, and we can investigate this area as if it was a bit frozen in time. Just to remind you, this is what it looks like. This is one of the tallest buildings in the Maya region. And this is Mexico at Calakmul, one of its attempts to clear enough of the jungle so you can see it, right? The rest of the jungle is all around. So you can imagine we have a small window through which we can see. This is what I see on the ground when I'm working. Trees, a lot of them, beautiful. You see, and even macaws who are flying over the canopy, what do they see? Trees. Again, we're not tired of trees, but it's in and amongst the trees that we find the sites and the big cities and the settlement and the population. This is a picture from the 19th century of the effort required simply to expose the main site of Tikal in Guatemala so that it could be visible. And this is just the main center, right? This is not the rest of the city, which is 30, 40 square kilometers around. Things haven't changed that much in over 100 years. This is what we do in the field. The occasional fauna that we find, the little crocodile that one of my students was carrying. This is the kind of area that we work in. So it's beautiful, but again, it's hard to see more than 10 meters in front of your face. So much so that even in the earliest attempts at archaeology, Charles Lindbergh was called into famous for his quick jaunt over to Paris on his little plane. They said, "Charlie, why don't you come down and see if we can see anything from the air?" And so, jolly good man, he said, "Okay, I'll come down." And they flew over, and there was a New York Times article about sites that were first seen for the first time by white men, as it were. Probably not a headline that would be written today. But it shows you that they saw a lot of wonderful things, but again, covered with this canopy that preserves but hides. Satellite imagery was helpful, but not in the same way as a new technology that has brought us a wealth of information that has completely changed our view. This is known as LiDAR, which eventually will be on our iPhones, and we'll all be able to do this on an app, I'm sure. But right now, it's a plane, a small little it's an airborne sensor flying at 600 meters. That's what I mean by 600 meters above the ground, that is able to shoot pulses onto the ground and give you a map of the ground surface, despite the fact that there are trees in between. This is a typical map of LiDAR, and what we can do is classify all the points and digitally deforest. And see, I went back too quickly, and see what's underneath, right? This is what we can now do, and it basically exposes the ground without having to deforest it, which we don't want, right? And this has been a new kind of technology that has been applied to this region, and it has exposed not just the sites that we've known about, but a plethora of other sites all throughout the region, thousands and thousands of buildings, that large and small, causeways, terraces, canals, houses, even new sites altogether that have provided us with a completely different view of the lowland Maya civilization, despite the fact that we have been working there for over 100 years. And this is one of the beauties of LiDAR, is it allows us to see the very big, but also the very small. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that very small in a moment. Now, what we do with this data is the raw data on the left. We then manipulate it to get better image, get better contrast, and then we digitize it, and we're able to find buildings, identify terraces, and we create a map, a site map on the right. This process would have taken 10 years with traditional techniques. Now it takes a year. And in so doing, we can focus in, and what I do focus a lot on, are the small houses, the houses of you and me, the houses of everybody who wasn't a king and wasn't a queen. And these are these little squares, these little blocks. And these little blocks actually represent houses, as you can see there in yellow, the 3D. And those houses represent people and different generations of people living, homes, that households, as we call them, of farmers, of regular Maya folk. And we then can compare these with modern day ethnographic examples of houses or households, house plots that are found throughout the Maya region to show how, or to learn how the ancient Maya lived in many ways similar to what we find in places around the Maya region today, right? And we can see what kinds of, we look at ethnographic analogy to see what kinds of activities are done in the house. There's a very strong division of labor between men and women, where women work in the house, in and around the house and in the orchards around, whereas men are more out in the fields, cultivating the crops, cultivating the corn. And of course, that involves a lot of religious ceremonies that recall the ancient gods that we just heard about, right? These are still being honored today by many, many Maya farmers. And so we have this model of what is a household, a house plot, gardens, kitchens, buildings, open spaces, where the fields might be and where the forest might be. And we can use this to then begin to look at these LiDAR data. And we can start to see, now maybe this isn't exciting immediately, but there are lots of little bumps there. I've spent the last 3 years looking at bumps on LiDAR and putting dots on a computer. I've had to change my eyeglass prescription twice because of it. But we can see all of these different buildings, but we can also see, and on the right, you see these sort of linear features. We also start to see terraces. We start to see walls. Here, an example of another set of LiDAR data, and to the right, you can see how it's been identified. Or pink are for houses or buildings, and then all the little garden walls that separate houses one from another. We have now this incredible, almost cadastral map of household of regular Maya living in and around these big sites. This is not one that's been digitized fully, but if you can start to see some of the bumps, you start to see some of the lines, what you start to really appreciate is that the entire landscape is been modified. This is an anthropogenically modified landscape where everything, terraces, dams, check dams, garden plots, all sorts of canals and irrigation systems are being built into the landscape, things that we could not see when we were on the ground. And now we can see an entirely modified landscape. And we can see that it's not a small one little house here and a little house there. It is the entire landscape is now entirely stepped and made more productive by these features, thus increasing the amount of cultivation of corn. The Maya landscape is also, especially in this area, filled with what are called locally bajos, which in Spanish means just low areas, swamps or wetlands. You can see on the map all the sort of bluish gray are basically wetlands. And what we've discovered looking at LiDAR is that these wetlands were crisscrossed with canals, and some of them in rectilinear, some of them in sort of checkerboard patterns, that were clearly examples of an effort by the Maya to control the hydrological behavior of these swamps, to make them wetter throughout the year and dry throughout the year so that they could cultivate them, rendering swamps incredibly useful for agriculture. Here's an example of a wetland that has a central canal and all these side canals coming on either side of it, at the foot of a small hill, on top of which the hills is the settlement. So people weren't living in a swamp, but they were cultivating the swamp. These are kinds of things that we knew the Maya did, but the scale at which they did it is now being shown to us in LiDAR in ways that are just still astounding. In this case, we have a very large site sort of in the center left, and to the right is a very large reservoir. And what you can see emanating from the sort of bottom right is a canal. This was a large canal that was built for the Maya to control the level of water and take it either from the Bajo to from the swamp to this lake, or vice versa, depending on how they control the sluice dams, and basically have a massive amount of engineering for water and to render certain areas much more cultivable because of this control. Right? So give you an example. Here is a LiDAR image of a landscape. Maybe some of you with eagle eyes can see little dots and so forth of buildings. Now we just put everything that's humanly built on that landscape. I'm going to go back. Landscape, human impact of landscape, right? The entire landscape is impacted by buildings, terraces, causeways, ditches, dams, and canals, right? This is an entirely built-up landscape. And as a function of that, we can see now, this is one of my students that had this brilliant idea of showing what would the Maya lowlands look like at 30,000 feet. You know, when you're flying at night and you're flying over the U.S., you can see big cities or big orange kind of lights on a clear night, and then you leave the central area. The suburbs are a little darker, and then you get to more rural areas that are darker. This was the idea of this map: is what would the Maya lowlands look at 30,000 feet back in around 700 AD, right? And you can see certain hubs are bright yellow. These are strong, dense cities. And then you have these areas that are more suburban and then more rural as you go farther out. The Maya had these very complex and very dense cities that we were not aware of until we could actually analyze these LiDAR data. So what we're able to do now with some of these, with these data, is really put the archaeological data to work to explain and to understand why we have such a focus, such an emphasis on this maize deity and on this particular notion that men are made of maize or humans are made of maize. We now can actually see the extent to which they modified their entire landscape to be able to make it productive for the cultivation of this crop and basically run the engine of the Maya civilization. Thank you very much. And our final speaker this evening, I have the pleasure of introducing Diana Wangeman, who will talk to us about her experiences with the cultivation of corn, maize. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I would like to start my presentation with this picture. This photo, it's the corn of my family. It's actually the last harvest that I was involved in before I moved to the US. Some plants need birds to distribute their seeds. Others need the wind. In this case, the corn needs us. For over 150 generations, the farmers for all over Mexico and Mesoamerica and South America have been passing down the seeds from a father to son. As in this picture, you can see these are the hands of my mom. She is selecting the crops that she thinks are gonna be the best for our next season. And this is something very special because creates a very symbiotic relationship between not only the corn with the place that is growing, the climate, but also to the people that is growing it and to the family that is growing it. Because it's adapting to the taste of each family. And because of everything of this very bond and relationship with the people, it's why we like to call it native corn. It involves a lot of culture, of the place, of the people that is growing it. So we like to use the word native corn. So I come from a small town in Oaxaca, and all of my life, we've been growing corn, my family, like many other families in all over Mexico. The first picture on the left is my grandfather. He's still planting corn at age of 82. Then it's my mom, my dad. You can see my siblings and the corn that we plant. It's something that you grow and you are involved your whole life. And because of the seed, it's very important. And like my mom said, this is like gold, that it's something that it's a gift that your great-grandfather also planted before us. And it's a gift that we're giving to you to preserve. And so the seeds need to be protected from a lot of threats that they have, like cross-pollination, with GMO corn, climate change, or farmers that are thinking that their harvest is not. It doesn't have the value that it does, and just migrate to the States looking for a better life. And that's why when we created Sobre Masa, we started thinking about how to protect this and promote also this culture that is involving hundreds and hundreds of history and background that we have before us. So we work with a lot of varieties of corn. Here you can see from the first three, it's a race that is called Cónico. And we have in the middle, Cacahuacintle, and the last two are Bolita. They are from different places over Mexico. The first three are from Tlaxcala. The one in the middle, it's from el Estado de Mexico, Mexico State, and the two on the right are from Oaxaca. We try to rotate the seats in the restaurant, and we want to promote and to showcase the variety of the corn that has been growing from all over Mexico, and has traveled the seed to South America and to Europe. And we think that one of the best ways to try and to promote this the seed is into making tortillas. The tortillas are the way that we have been doing the whole life. It's by the process of nixtamalization, where you cook the corn with cal, that is calcium hydroxide, and then with a mill, you make the masa, and then you press and make it into a tortillas. This is something that we also use like as a spoon, just with every meal. And it's something that it's in our everyday life for us as Mexicans. In Sobre Masa, we also try to showcase and share this culture that it's been heritage to us. Like the first dish on the left, you can see a cracked corn mole with oyster mushrooms. On the top, you have fresh masa that it's shaped into an infinity of antojitos. We have tamales, and for today, we brought the corn in 3 different presentations. The first one, it's a beverage that is called tejuino. Tejuino is a fermented beverage that has masa in it. The second one, it's a chocolate chip cookie that is completely gluten-free, and it's made with cacahuacintle corn, that is the corn of pozole. And the last one is tortilla chips. So I just would like to say that the corn, it's a gift from our ancestors, and it's a tradition that's been keeping alive since many, many generations. And without the corn, we wouldn't be as we are right now. So we have to protect the seed. Thank you so much.
I'm so pleased to be here sharing this stage with these wonderful colleagues and friends. And I really do not know how to start this because I'm overwhelmed with all these things and topics that we have been flowing around and going deep into some of them. We went through the journey of the maize god, deep into the underworld. Then we went with Marcello up to the heights and the heaven to see more about the agricultural bounding. And then at the end, we have this little taste of what maize can be transformed and how you can keep them growing, cherish it, and at the end, give to the community in many, many ways as tortillas, tamales, and other antojitos. So I don't know, maybe we can start or have one interaction about how people transform the landscape and all these ways of trying to modify the landscape in order to have all the food that was needed for feed the community, and also how these grains were exchanged in the past and nowadays. So I don't know, Marcello.
Sure, I'm happy to start. You know, obviously, as I mentioned, the research that we've been doing with these new technologies are not showing us anything that we didn't know in some form. It was just the scale of the transformation or the modifications to the landscape that was quite the surprising element, that the little bits and pieces we thought that the Maya might have practiced intensive or wetland agriculture in certain areas where they had to, sort of where it was absolutely required to survive. What we found out is that they are actually, you know, practicing it everywhere. And that sort of changed in many of our minds as to what that must have been in terms of a society's requirement of production, right? How much had to be made, for whom was it being made, why was so much, how is it transported, how is it taxed? One of the advantages of cereals is that they're very taxable. That's great things for states, right? So when you think about all of these questions, it sort of is a cascading effect from the perspective of someone who looks at ancient societies and their forms of organization, right? And so that to us was really kind of an eye-opening event that was for many of us transformative, because we could really see for the first time a society that had taken a landscape and completely modified it to render it extremely productive. But this is sort of a forensic way of seeing this question, right? It's a bare bones, kind of cold way of bird's eye view. And what was fascinating to see, of course, is that surrounding all of this, from ethnographic examples throughout the Maya region in Mexico, there's so much, how do you put it? There's so much ceremony associated with the cultivation of corn and what it means to people. And it's not just, you know, an archaeologist later on, thousands of years, over 1,000 years, oh, look, they had a great society. Great, good for them. But there's a sort of a sense also of the importance of it. And that's what I also found fascinating to hear. And maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, this notion of how it is that it is a central part of daily life for many people.
Yeah. Well, like for example, in my family, the way of like selecting the corn, planting the corn, and thanking God for the land and for the water, and praying for a good season is something that happens every year. Like I see it in my grandfather, how he get the family together every year to ask for a good season, to have abundance in corn, because he says, like, if we have corn, we are rich, because it's something that we have on our table every day. So yeah, it's very much alive.
I think it's important to contextualize the relevance of these archaeological finds that Marcello described for us, because in the Maya lowlands in particularly, water is a very scarce resource. And agriculture depends on rainfall to a large extent. So realizing that the Maya in ancient times did all this landscaping and all this work that must have been tremendous to take the best advantage, the best possible advantage of the very limited resources that they had is something amazing. And in terms of, again, in terms of what we learned from modern ethnographic research in Mesoamerican communities is that people still depend on limited resources. Rainfall, for example, we were talking right before the event started about this and how people wait for rain, right? Because they need to plant. They need to plant, and they need to know when to plant and when the seedlings will take the best advantage of the limited available rainfall that comes down. And so they're desperate. They need to know, and they need to pray. They need to, in Mesoamerica, the very general belief is that you can't just go throw your seeds there and expect the earth to produce a bounty. You have to ask. First, you have to ask. You have to come humbly and ask the earth and give something back. Feed it. Feed the earth. People in many places we read that they go and do prayers in their fields, open a hole, put some food, put drink, and then they can expect the earth to give something back.
If I wanted to piggyback on that, just recently, almost just 2 weeks ago, a new article was just published using, again, some of these data that we're talking about, showing how some monumental sites, massive, large Maya sites, were oriented in such a way that they were able to identify the suns rising on the horizon at different points of the year. And interestingly, the points at which the points of the horizon that were important to them were in February and in October, right? And what are those? Those are the months in which you begin to think about the sowing of the fields and then the harvest, right? And so it's that 130-day cycle essentially from when you begin to when you reap, right? And so we have architecturally even very large monumental sites oriented around that question that Oswaldo was talking about, when to plant and when not. All those questions that the Popol Vuh is asking were being addressed in 1000 BCE through architecture. So we know that this was something that was part of not just the preoccupation, but the ceremonial life and the daily life of the Mesoamerican peoples, starting as far back as 1000 BC.
So I think time has taken over this stage or not. I don't know. I don't see. But if I don't see anybody, I can keep on. So Diana mentioned nixtamalization and why it is important for the use and consume of the maize. But how can we know how far in time this magical transformation of corn started? Can our colleagues, archaeologists, tell us more about this? Or and what are the traces that you found in the ground that allow you to know how the maize was transformed in Masa?
Well, we're learning a lot about that because archaeology nowadays has a lot of new resources, new technologies, new ways of learning about analyzing the material traces that we find. And for example, we have things like starch residue analysis. So you take an ancient grinding stone and scrape it carefully and get microscopic traces of starch, that maize starch that's still preserved there. And of course, this has to be done carefully, and the people who are trained, and not me. And then microscopically, you can identify the grain, the traces of starch, and this is some of the oldest evidence that we have for maize and also for nixtamalization. Just recently, there was an article that analyzed the traces of, cornstarch, that the distinctive shape of the grains indicated that it had been nixtamalized, and this is the oldest evidence that we have for nixtamalized maize. So maize that is cooked with lime from limestone, cal, that that is a process that people still do in all over Mesoamerica, and that is very important for nutritional purposes. It allows people to absorb all the nutrients in maize, which wouldn't be possible otherwise.
And this knowledge of nixtamalization is passed over the generations, so as in Diana's family. And can you tell us more about how you learned about how to transform maize in your family?
Well, it's something you do every day, As I was saying, corn is part of our diet as Mexicans or Latins. So you put to cook your corn every day to have tortillas at your table. And the way to do it is you boil the water with calcium hydroxide or limestone, and you add the corn. And once the external layer of the corn is like peeling, then it's ready. I don't know. It's something that you learn over the years, and then you grind the corn even in the metate or in the molino, and then you obtain your masa. And as Oswaldo was saying, this is a very important process because the nutrients that are inside the corn become available after they are nixtamalized. If you just consume the corn without being nixtamalized, then it wouldn't have the nutrients that you need.
Let us remember that this is the work of women who rise up very, very early in the morning. Sometimes they need to go down to the river or a spring to fetch water first. Then do this whole process, and then spend hours and hours grinding the corn grains in a stone. This is the traditional way. Nowadays, frankly, most women take their nixtamalized, their cooked corn to a place where they grind it, and they have these very noisy machines that just grind it. Still, after they get that, they still pass it through the grinding stone because it makes finer and nicer masa. There's another thing that Diana mentioned that I wanted to remark upon, and it's, you mentioned tezuino. So a fermented beverage made from maize. So all that we have been saying is sounds perhaps very solemn and very serious, but that's not necessarily the case. And in fact, some of the earliest use of maize ancestors that we know in Mesoamerica is hard to explain, because the grains that Teosinte, the maize ancestor, produced were tiny, and very difficult to consume. So some archaeologists think that what they consumed was the juices from the stalk, and they fermented them and made alcohol and had a lot of fun.
There's, archaeologists are often known to be the last ones in the bar. right? And so when we say this, nobody takes us seriously, but there's a strong thought, there's a very strong sense that a lot of the earliest domestication of cereals, even in Egypt and so forth, is to make beer or to make the alcoholic beverages that would maybe lubricate the negotiations of some of the principles of the society. The word beer is an ancient Egyptian word, right? So the idea that perhaps some of the earliest domesticates, whether it be corn or barley or wheat, were actually aimed at making this alcohol, make a fermented beverage, is probably something that we may overlook to our detriment, because it really changes the way we might think why they would bother with some of these finicky plants that hadn't been turned into what we think of as corn today, right? I mean, I think that's one of the important things to appreciate, is that the corn cob is the product of generations of thousands of years of genetic modification by humans to make it productive, to make it useful as a starch. But its ancestor, which is still among us today, that Oswaldo was referring to, teosinte, is a finicky weed that has naturally then the impulse to propagate, which means that the kernels that would make part of the cob fly away very simply, very easily, right? That's the whole point of a plant, is to reproduce. Corn can't survive on its own. It needs us. Those kernels that are stuck to the cob, the fun of eating corn on the cob, those, for a plant, that's a really bad idea, right? Those kernels should go away and, multiply and be happy, right? Have little corn plants of your own. But the corn can't do that, and it needs human intervention, right? Which is, of course, this very interesting symbiotic relationship that happens with domestication, with farming, where we talk a lot about, humans were able to domesticate animals and plants and bend them to their will. Well, we're all sedentary because we domesticated ourselves, right? Because of these plants. We had to tend to them. We had to provide all sorts of support for these plants to survive. And they feed us, but we feed them. And so it's a really fascinating idea of why would humans domesticate in the first place. And we think perhaps there might have been other more ceremonial or festive reasons why they would bother with some of these finicky cereals and plants initially, that eventually then became the staples that they became.
Well, thank you, Oswaldo, Diana, and Marcello, for this wonderful journey about maize. And let's go out and have some and treats from Sobre Masa made with maize and cacao. Thank you all for being here for this wonderful night. Come and see the exhibition. It's going to be open until April 2nd. Thank you, Fran.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate your time. Thank you to our amazing speakers tonight. A huge thank you to Claudia Norman for all your hard work. Of course, Joanne Pillsbury, thank you so much. We developed and worked so hard together on this program. Please enjoy samples from the restaurant Sobre Masa as you exit. My team will be handing them out, one per household. Please don't open them in the museum. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.